What if war wasn't just a policy of defense, but a multi-trillion-dollar business model? This paradox shapes the modern world in ways few fully understand. Every empire in history fought wars to secure land, wealth, or power, but the United States transformed war itself into a system of profit, a self-sustaining cycle where every conflict fuels the machine. Stick with me, because this isn't just about America's wars. It's about how an empire learned to monetize destruction, establishing a model now controlling the global economy. When World War II ended in 1945, most nations lay in ruins. Yet the United States emerged richer, stronger, and more industrially dominant than ever before. Unlike others, America kept its factories roaring. Peace, it turned out, was bad for business. This was the turning point: war as an engine of economic reinvention. Before the war, the United States had been inward-looking and reluctant to engage globally. The Great Depression fostered isolationism, limiting economic growth and global influence. Between 1941 and 1945, the U.S. government spent the modern equivalent of $4 trillion on the war effort. This massive spending didn't just buy weapons, it built an economy. By the time peace arrived, the military-industrial complex was so vast and profitable that it couldn't simply stop. Factories needed contracts, workers needed jobs, and corporations needed demand. The government ensured demand never disappeared. In 1947, the Cold War began, a conflict without front lines, where fear itself became the enemy and the fuel for this system. This new era created perfect conditions for a business model that thrived on perpetual fear, setting the stage for decades of continuous military investment and political influence. It was during this time that President Dwight Eisenhower, a five-star general, issued a grave warning about a new threat within America: the military-industrial complex. In his 1961 farewell address, Eisenhower described a partnership between government, military, and defense contractors, a triangle of power where war spending fueled economic growth and political power. Eisenhower knew the machine was already built and warned that this unchecked power might consume the republic if left unchallenged. How does this system operate? Every war requires weapons, which need research, funded by taxpayer money flowing not only to soldiers, but also to defense contractors. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics profit not just by making weapons, but from the anticipation of war. In 2023, the United States spent over $877 billion on its military, more than the next 10 nations combined. This scale is unprecedented in history. Why such spending? Because war is no longer just a response to threats. It is now seen as an investment, an economic engine in its own right. Consider the paradox. Whenever global tensions rise, whether in Ukraine, Taiwan, or the Middle East, stock prices for defense companies surge, markets celebrate conflict, and fear drives profits. War spending extends far beyond weapons. It infiltrates infrastructure, technology, education, even entertainment. The GPS on your phone owes its existence to Cold War military funding. So too did the internet, microchips, satellites, and jet engines. War became the mother of innovation, not because peace couldn't innovate, but because fear consistently secured funding. Every system built on fear needs enemies to justify itself. During the Cold War, that enemy was the Soviet Union, a rival that sustained decades of military spending and political tension. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, America faced an existential crisis. For the first time in half a century, its great rival vanished and defense spending dropped sharply. Factories slowed, stock prices dipped, and it seemed peace might finally break the cycle. But this respite was brief. The tragedy of September 11, 2001, rebooted the war machine overnight. Terror became the new enemy, borderless, endless, and perfectly profitable. Between 2001 and 2021, the United States spent over $8 trillion on the so-called War on Terror. Funds flowed not just to soldiers, but to contractors, consultants, tech firms, and private armies. By 2010, more private contractors operated in Iraq and Afghanistan than U.S. troops. They built bases, trained forces, and managed logistics. War transformed into a subscription service. Every bomb drop generated invoices. Every destroyed building became a reconstruction project, and every military withdrawal created new opportunities for defense spending, surveillance, cybersecurity, and drone technology. This system is not speculation. It's accounting. Halliburton, once led by Vice President Dick Cheney, received over $39 billion in government contracts during the Iraq War. Lockheed Martin made billions from the F-35 fighter jet. Despite costly delays, this project, estimated at over $1.7 trillion, remains funded because thousands of jobs depend on it across 45 states. No senator wants to cut defense spending when it threatens local jobs. Political leverage protects these projects, making the military-industrial complex politically untouchable and economically indispensable. But the deeper truth is this: America's entire economy depends on war. The U.S. dollar's global dominance, the bond market, and the petrodollar system are reinforced by military power. After World War II, the U.S. anchored the world economy via the Bretton Woods Agreement, tying currencies to the dollar and the dollar to gold. This financial strength built global dependency. In 1971, Nixon ended the gold standard, forcing the dollar to find a new foundation in oil. The U.S. struck a deal with Saudi Arabia to price oil exclusively in dollars, enforcing global demand for American currency. This petrodollar system created a marriage of money and might. War didn't just protect freedom, it protected demand, ensuring the U.S. dollar remained the world's reserve currency. From the Middle East to Latin America, U.S. wars, coups, and interventions often aligned with a simple goal: maintaining global economic dominance through control of resources and markets. Examples abound. In 1953, Iran's Prime Minister Mossadegh was overthrown after nationalizing oil resources. In 2003, Saddam Hussein met a similar fate for proposing oil sales in euros. Libya's Gaddafi planned a gold-backed African currency before his country was bombed into collapse. Coincidence, or a consistent strategy of economic control masked as democracy? War became more than a business. It became a brand, marketed under freedom and democracy, yet always about controlling resources, markets, and narratives that shape global politics. Economists call the system military Keynesianism, using war spending as economic stimulus. When consumer demand falls, military budgets rise, creating jobs and political stability. It's the same logic as building roads or schools. But instead of bridges, bombs are built. The difference: bombs destroy value, and destruction must be constantly replaced. This ensures the system sustains itself by making peace short-lived, never long enough to question the cycle of conflict and profit that defines it. When America left Afghanistan in 2021, it ended the world's longest war, not with a clear victory, but in profit. Defense stocks rose and new contracts were already underway. China, Russia, cyber warfare, space conflicts. The names change, but the business model remains. Every new enemy is a new market, and every war a quarterly report waiting to be written. But here lies the paradox. The same system that turned war into a business also trapped America inside its own machine, forcing endless spending on wars and the image of strength. The Pentagon can't audit itself. Trillions go missing or are unaccounted for, yet Congress approves new budgets without question. Why? Because in Washington, peace has no lobby. Or does it? There's a haunting phrase from the 1970s. It is dangerous to be America's enemy or fatal to be its friend, reflecting the complex and costly nature of alliances. Many allies who hosted U.S. bases or supported policies often find themselves entangled in conflicts that outlast generations. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, all lasting legacies of intervention. Wars justified by ideals, freedom, democracy, security, often leave behind chaos, debt, and profit. War is a pattern not to win, but to continue the system itself. This transformation isn't about demonizing a nation. America didn't invent war, it industrialized it, making conflict scalable, repeatable, and profitable in a way no empire before did. The 20th century began with wars over territory. It ended with corporations fighting wars for contracts. Even the tools of war, drones, cyber weapons, propaganda, are privatized today. Behind each weapon is a stock ticker, a balance sheet, a shareholder report. War is no longer chaos, it's organized revenue, sustaining an economy addicted to tension and fear. Ironically, the United States, once known as the arsenal of democracy, is now its largest debtor. It spends more to maintain its empire than any in history, financed largely by debt. Its debt now exceeds $34 trillion. The dollar is no longer backed by gold but by military might and market confidence, a fragile foundation depending on global belief. What happens when the world stops believing? When allies lose faith, debt overwhelms growth, and the dollar falters, the business model of war could collapse, reshaping global power. History suggests empires that rely on war profit eventually lose control of their costs. Athens, Spain, Britain, all collapsed under inflation, debt, and disillusionment. The quiet tragedy of our age is a nation that built greatness on innovation and freedom, now sustaining itself on conflict and control. Will it remember Eisenhower's warning? A nation obsessed with arms may forget the purpose of peace. Prosperity built on fear cannot last because war as a business remains war, and every business eventually faces its reckoning. Markets will cool, debts will rise. One day the machine will stop, not with an explosion, but with exhaustion. And the world will remember what America once stood for. Not the empire of war, but the promise of peace. The answers aren't hidden in the future, they're written clearly in the past. If you found this exploration insightful, our next video dives into the global impacts of economic sanctions in shaping world power. Check out our playlist on economic history and global power for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. What surprised you most about how war became a business? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective enriches the conversation. If you found value in this analysis, consider subscribing for thoughtful, well-researched documentaries on history and economics.